the Idiot Box, where we explore the good, the bad, and the wacky in television. I'm Allison Lips. Steve Newvine joins us today. Steve is the author of Jack and Johnny, Benny, Carson, and a Friendship Made for Television, which explores the 20-year friendship between comedians Jack Benny and Johnny Carson. Today, we're discussing a book Steve recommended called You're Lucky, You're Funny: How Life Becomes a Sitcom. It's written by Phil Rosenthal, who was the creator and producer of Everybody Loves Raymond. Hi, Steve. After reading the book, it became clear to me why you recommended it, but do you want to share your general thoughts before we dive into it?
Sure, sure. And I'm really, as I mentioned in a message to you, I'm curious to get your thoughts as well because it's been a couple of years since I read it. I read it in 2023,
Yeah.
and I really enjoyed it because I like that behind the scenes kind of stuff. How does a TV
Yes.
show and the idea of a weekly sitcom, that beast that has to be fed every week, and how do you look 3 4 5 12 episodes into the future, and I thought he had a great insight on all of that. Plus, there was this connection with Johnny Carson. He tells the story of having lunch along with Ray Romano with Johnny Carson
Yes.
post Johnny's retirement, and some of the other interesting stories. Like, I didn't know he was involved with that video that he produced for the Clintons on one of the White House Correspondents' Dinners. And there are lots of little things like that. And then just on a deeply personal level, the way he proposed to his wife, I just thought that was a great story and someone I wouldn't mind having a cup of coffee with down at the coffee shop.
No, and I didn't know that his wife, Monica Horan, is Amy
Yeah,
on Everybody Loves Raymond. I had no idea. She was
amazing.
cast, even though he was like, do I really want to work with my wife? But the writer's room overruled him.
It's a good thing too, because she was such a great character on that
That
show.
show.
The
Yes.
range that both her character and the Robert character went through. They were together, then they were not, and then they're back, and
Yeah.
it was quite a range for her, and the story about the proposal, though, I just thought was great. That they were at that point bi-coastal because he was
Yes.
busy on the other coast, and she came out to visit. And again, without reading the exact quote, but it was something to the effect that she had this look in her eye, like, you brought me all the way over here to show me some,
Yes.
or whatever. He was taking her to some landmark of some kind, and of course that's where he proposed. And it was just a cute story. And as I'm about to enter into year 46 of my marriage, you kind
Well,
of remember
congratulations.
things. Well, thank you very much. Not as astounding as my brother, and my brother and his wife just celebrated their 50th anniversary over the weekend. But I guess my family has been blessed with long marriages.
Yes. Good for you. And your
Yes,
brother.
my brother. Yes, yes.
My take on this book was it wasn't what I was expecting, and that was actually because it was better than I was expecting. I really thought this was going to be Phil Rosenthal just talking about his life and one of those overindulgent memoirs about people behind the scenes that, like, okay, great. Like, you had your hit show. There's his food show on Netflix that is huge amongst a certain subset of the population, but you don't really know who he is unless you're a huge fan or TV buff. And reading the book, it's like, oh, he's focusing more on here's his life as a struggling actor, but he doesn't focus on it. He's like, I toiled as an actor for 10 years. I put that dream aside, fell into comedy writing, did that on some shows that weren't very good and didn't last very long. Got this packet in the mail from David Letterman and Worldwide Pants that said,
Right.
we're looking to develop a sitcom around Ray Romano. which Phil happened to have seen Ray Romano's performance on The Late Show,
Mhm.
thought the same thing, developed that idea, pitched it, got lucky, it was chosen. He connected with Ray, and they realized their families were kind of the same. And a lot of the stories in the show came from either Phil or Ray's life, as well as the writers. That's a show that is very much based in reality. And
Yeah. Well, it's you make a good point about he saw himself as a stand-up, was going to make his appearance on the Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson and be off and running and have this
I thought it was
wonderful.
Letterman, not The Tonight Show.
Well, no, that I'm talking about Phil, that his dream was
Oh,
to
his dream.
as a stand-up comedian, and then
I thought Phil was
realized,
Phil was a stand-up?
right, well, he wanted that career in
Okay.
and realized early on that that really wasn't going to work for him, and that he was funnier in creating situations and jokes and
Right,
whatever
because
for.
he did the improv for a while.
Right. And so he realized early on, because I think a lot of comedians probably, I'm talking about the young comedians trying to make their break, probably stay with it longer than they realize. It's probably very hard to say, this isn't going to work for me. And he
Right.
realized early enough to just kind of, okay, that's fine. I can do that, but I can do something else as well. And so I think that's where what appealed to me as well, is being able to recognize, okay, this path isn't quite taking me to where I want to go. I'll try another path, and to try other things, and to
Yes.
find something that really connects, and then reaping the rewards. And it's interesting, post Raymond, he has this career now that is, it's not exactly maybe what he set out to do, but it's rewarding, and we're still invoking his name,
Yes.
and he's made quite a career for himself.
Right, and it's like, can you believe the producer of Everybody Loves Raymond has this food show on Netflix? Like, good for him, but that's just odd. And
Yeah,
I
you
think he
can.
finds it odd also. The book
Yeah.
was written well before that,
Yes, yes.
but if you listen to him speak, he's just like, I don't know how this happened, but I'm grateful for it.
Oh yes, he's had it's amazing. The book, I believe, was written in 2006,
I think
and even, is that what it says on yours?
I think
2006.
it's 2007, but let me double check that since it's in front of me. I'm looking at this page. 2006, you were right. 2006.
So, but I think what amazes me about this, I mean, here we are, what 19 years later,
Yeah.
talking about it, and but the series itself, I mean, whenever that show pops on, and you're just switching around, and you've seen
Yeah.
each episode times, and you just find yourself just sitting back, and my wife and I will just share a few laughs about that situation, and we know what's coming up, but it really has endured, and to see where, what is it? TV Land runs about 6 episodes a day, and it's just, I
Yes.
mean, it's all over. We found it some obscure channel last night, and
I think it's on
they're
Paramount as well.
all over the place. And
Yes.
other than maybe the cell phone sizes are different, or whatever, it
Yeah.
could still run, it could still play, and we know shows have an ending, and they move on and stuff, but that one really endures, and glad, and frankly, kind of glad they never decided to reboot. And I know there were a lot of reasons why that have really nothing to do with the creative side of it, but I think that was that's smart. Let it stand for what it was,
Right.
and still enjoy it as a time capsule, or just very funny family comedy and very real situations.
I feel like Everybody Loves Raymond, both in terms of time slots on these channels that do a lot of reruns, and in terms of how people feel about older television kind of stepped in the place of where the Cosby Show used to be, where it's like, you've got nothing else to do. It's on. Let's watch it, enjoy it. We can relate to it. And for reasons that we all are aware of, the Cosby Show is not as popular as it once was. And now it seems to be Raymond holding that mantle right now.
Yes, it's endured for so long, and I've always it's a small piece of frustration for me, but I always thought the layout of the mom and dad's house is incongruent with the layout of Raymond's house. Because if you're walking across the street,
Yeah,
it would make sense that, the front door would be to the left of my screen in the parents' house because you're
right.
walking, but yet it's the same layout as far as where the front door is and the kitchen as the other house. So I thought, gee, I just it was one of those little quirky things that I still think about it whenever they do an episode where they go across the street to the parents' house. Yeah, here we are, two people like, yeah, that
Yeah. I didn't think too much about it. I had always assumed that the kitchens faced each other.
okay, so you would have them over on the other side, so their backyard would be together. I always figured there was the street, the road, and then the parents' house was across the street. Well, here, yeah, we
What does this
we'll get away
fictional
from
sitcom road look like?
that's right. That's right. Someone will find this 100 years from now and say, what were they talking about? But the story, and he repeats it in the Carson podcast as well. He was a guest on one of the early Carson podcasts
Okay.
that Mark Melkoff did. Is the story about having lunch with Johnny Carson, and I just
Yes.
thought, what a great opportunity to be able to do that, and in that kind of setting. You're not a guest on the show, or you just here's someone that you've admired all your life, and you're sitting across the table, breaking bread and having lunch and joking around and everything. So it was quite a story, and boy, to
Yeah.
live vicariously through that experience had to be something.
And Phil also mentioned a similar thing with Mel Brooks. I think,
Hmm.
oh no, it was Norman Lear.
Yes, you're right.
Norman Lear, who wanted to bring a friend who was Carl Reiner, which, like, you're not going to tell Norman Lear, like, no, you can't bring a friend.
Oh no.
But the fact that the friend was Carl Reiner, I'm like, okay. That's why I was thinking Mel Brooks, because I remembered Carl Reiner, and those two go along.
Yeah, yes. And we just saw where Mel just celebrated 99. Boy, what a
And
what a
we're getting Spaceballs too.
what. Oh yes, and yeah. Speaking of Spaceballs 2, the Naked Gun's coming back this summer with Liam Neeson playing the
Yes.
Leslie Nielsen role, and I just was rewatching a couple of those movies this weekend, and I was like, wow, probably a movie that'll get me back actually inside the theater this summer.
Okay.
So coming out on video.
And going back to You're Lucky, You're Funny, I feel like this is one of those books that when, like, radio, TV, film, like, TV students are graduating, like, just give them a copy of this because it
Yes.
tells you how the industry works. It's a lot of, like, here's how a show structurally works. It's not a book where it's like, here's the format, but it's someone who has done it where it's like, yeah, you need to understand this. Things have to be believable because their show is about real life. Obviously, if you're writing like Star Trek, it has to be believable in universe, but you don't have to worry about interpersonal relationships ringing true on Earth. Like the Klingons have their own thing going on.
Yes, I of course that probably was the most fascinating part of the book for me because as I mentioned earlier, that's kind of my thing. How do you make it? How do you keep it going?
Yeah.
And that's little things like the idea that each writer was expected to deliver a rough script by the end of the season for the next season, so that
Right.
they could all go to a hiatus knowing that okay, at least we got half a dozen things that we could work on if we come up dry over the hiatus,
Right.
and not constantly be feeling like, hey, what are we going to do next week? We have a show for later this year, and in watching Everybody Loves Raymond, there was always a Thanksgiving episode, a Christmas episode. I even
Yeah.
found one that you could construe as a Mother's Day episode. I forget the premise now and everything, but
Yeah.
season there were some that you could just rely on. Okay, that was our go-to, and just I love it at Christmas time where TV Land will just run 7 or 8 holiday episodes in a row of
Yes.
Raymond, and whether it was the Christmas photograph or the getting the parents and Robert to leave the house early, and the whole the model airplane and all that stuff. There's just some very funny routines there, but
Yeah.
the writers as a team, and this may be what happens on other shows, but at least here it's written out, and I can I can see it. I can see, okay, this is how they go from one episode to the next, and
Yes.
how they run of it. Good friend of mine writes for television in Hollywood, but he wrote on Law and Order, one of the
Oh.
Law and Order variations for a few years, and not exactly clear what he's working on right now, but that routine where all the writers are kind of contributing to each script, and they're all named in the beginning of each episode,
Yeah.
and credited, and it's just interesting work, and this friend of mine worked in television news alongside me way back back in the day, and so and I think he even told me once it was much like putting on a newscast every night. You knew that at the end of your 8-hour day, you had to have something
Yeah.
that you put on the air. Well, in a much different setting, they know that at the end of their assigned time to write, they have to have an episode that's ready to be shot. And of course, there's so many other aspects that go into producing episodic television, but it's that to me was probably the most interesting part of the book was the routine, and uh, and of course that gets into how do you get your ideas, and as we described, some of the
Yeah.
ideas come from the experiences the writers had, and um, I know at least one of the actors uh, mentioned that once on a talk show. So just about every premise of every episode came from something that actually happened to one of the writers, and so it is, and
Yes.
as a father during that period of time, still am a father, but my kids were in that
Yeah.
same age back then. The idea, like the Girl Scout cookies and the battle to sell the most and all of that, and different instances like that, or the homework pressure that teachers were placing on the kids, and how parents had to deal with that, and all that. Some of those things ring true, and even if it wasn't exactly my experience, I can relate to that being something that was part of the human experience during the time the show was on.
Yes. And my favorite thing was because a lot of the writers' wives, there were a few women, but it was mostly the men that Phil talked about, were so used to their life being used for the show, they sort of started mocking their husbands. Like, well, at least you got something for the show. I wish I remembered the name of the writer, but his keys fell down an elevator shaft. And
Yeah.
He has the reaction you would if you lost your keys. And his wife's like, "Well, at least you have something for the show." And he's like, "We've already did this episode with Ray's wedding ring."
You
Okay.
know, that may be planted in my subconscious because every time I'm in a parking lot, I am so worried about the storm drains. And if I'm holding my keys, walking in a parking lot, and then like, oh, hang on to those keys tightly because you can just imagine the keys falling out of your hand through the grates, and
Yeah.
and you're far away, so you can't do much about it at that point. But that very human experience, exaggerated, I'm sure, for a comedy effect, but something we can all kind of relate to and
Yeah.
experience again. Just some of those things, even though it may have happened 30 years ago, it still happens today. It's just in a different
Yeah.
way. Life is, but we still encounter those same fears and situations that they did. Do
Yes.
you think we'll ever go back to like executive producing, weekly television, in the same kind of format of, not, being the producer, being back behind the scenes and running a show like that, or do you think one and done as far as Raymond was concerned, and I don't necessarily feel I need to prove myself again. I'm just curious what you thought about that.
In terms of like Phil's like, I'm not
Yeah,
going back to that grind.
right, right,
I understand it because it is 9 years, and then the last season they had to negotiate to get it knocked down
right.
to what they felt was a manageable number. And Phil is getting older, where you start feeling like, okay, maybe I don't want to work those long hours. He was very good with time management, like making sure the scripts got in before they left for vacation so that they would be ready for the next year without doing what he mentioned on previous shows, where it's like, okay, we'd have to start that script the week before it's due, then we'd rewrite it on the Monday, and we'd have to shoot it on Friday. But it would
Right.
be rewritten every single day that week, and those shows weren't very good and didn't last because they were not developed over time, and it was more, let's get something out so we don't get fired.
Yeah, it was you look back on how other shows did it, and I think there's something to be said about um, managing your work life and your home life in such a way that by taking care of the home life, your work life is going to be more productive. I think about Bob Newhart. I know on the first series, he may have done that on Newhart as well, but on the Bob Newhart show, my
Mhm.
understanding was it was for him, it was a negotiated 4-day work week with the shooting done on the fourth day. Um, whether that was the same on his other series, I'm not sure, but I think to him it was very important. He had young children at home
Yeah.
and wife, and he did not want to be in a situation where daddy was just gone all the time.
Right.
Of course, he had other things going on too. He had, Vegas and all the other things that he did. But I think it shows that if you can manage that, and I think Newhart once said, he said, if you have all the success in the world and your kids are screwed up, then what good is it? What good
Yeah.
is all that success? And I think Phil found that uh, routine. If he spent 51 weeks a year
Yeah.
working on that show, it probably, who knows, he might be working on wife number 2 or 3 by now, for all we know. But he would,
Right.
kept his home life the right balance with the work, and and manage that whole situation. And I'm sure the writers appreciated that as well. And maybe they complained about it. You know, what do you mean we got to do a script before hiatus? But yeah, I'm sure it paid off for them as well. And
I think
I'm
they
not
got used to it because most of them stayed for the entire run.
right, right, they did. And you know, the dynamic too of working with Ray and helping bring out the best in Ray as an actor, I thought was kind of interesting. He talks about the scene where um, they had the scenes, and they did variations of this episode over the years, but where Raymond and his dad get this kind of poignant father son time scene, and
Mhm.
it turns out to be more emotional than it is funny, but it's funny as
Yes.
well, and how Phil really helped pull that out of Ray. And I know there was sort of some kind of back and forth over whether Ray would say "I love you, Dad" in one of these scenes, and I kind of forget all the
Yeah.
particulars of, but the and it kind of that goes back to, if you're just so wrapped up with this week's show and what are we doing next week, and being so involved with all that, how do you have time to look at those finer points? And he found a way to do that, and quite successfully.
Yes. And also with that show, the work-life balance was important because they needed material.
It sure helps to be
Yes.
able to take your own life and say, well, yeah, maybe we could do a show. It's sort of a variation of the Seinfeld show about nothing. You could.
Yeah.
What did you do today? Well, I had lunch. He said, well, there's a show, and so, and that kind
Right.
of here, and turn it around. Um, I like that dynamic, that give and take in pulling that all together. And one of the shows, and it was like a 2 or 3 part episode. um it was all about um Deborah and Ray's mom having a an argument or a split, and for like 2 episodes, and I think it did run 3 episodes, but each episode there was this tension, this friction, and she just, and as a viewer seeing that for the first time,
Yeah.
it was really, if they're gonna just, you know, it's one thing to have the friction in episode one and then you resolve it in episode two, but it went on to episode three, and that was
Yeah.
the one. Robert, they do the whole ruse about being in a religious cult and all that, and that's
Oh,
how they heal.
yes.
They realized they were just putting it on just to kind of get the two of them back together. But I remember as a viewer, first time around, it's like,
Mhm.
wow, this is pretty heavy stuff, and every family's had that kind of situation. But it's like, do you really want to put that out
Mhm.
there for everybody to see and to go on for 3 weeks? It was quite brave. But at that point,
Yes.
I'm sure that was later in the run, and at that point, they could do pretty much whatever they wanted to do, and it was always a top rated show. So it was just keep them coming.
Right, like the Italy episode, which
Yeah.
CBS was like, "Do you really need this? Because this is expensive and not sure why you would want to. Like, other than you want a really nice vacation," which based on what I'm reading, it seems like Phil Rosenthal was embracing Adam Sandler's philosophy a little bit, where it's like, I'm making a movie because I want to visit Italy. Okay. It's nice to
Yes,
have
that
that kind of pull.
was, yeah, good. And yeah, and my wife was able to visit Italy right around that same time, so she appreciates whenever those are repeated, just as to kind of see those scenes again. And yes, I do, now that you brought that up, I had kind of forgotten about that, but reading about it from his perspective, it was like, yeah, we want to go to Italy. And you know, we're going to Italy. So
Right, and Ray is Italian American, and Ray Romano, the person, not the character. Well, Ray Romano is the person, Ray Barone is the character, but you know what I mean. Had never
yeah,
been to Italy before, and Phil was like, "You've gotta go," and this was kind of the con
yeah,
job to get him there, and Ray ended up falling in love with the country, and now goes there,
it
like,
was,
on
yeah.
vacation.
He and they also yeah, they did, was it, what did you say, 3 episodes in Italy, I think you're right, 2 or 3
2
anyway,
or 3, something like
and then brought some of those stories back, and
Stefania.
so some of those stories, served. So it was a good investment to go out, to go there and do that series of shows there, and then bring back some of the storylines to continue, using throughout the series. Uh,
It also makes sense because Ray wanted to explore Italy, that's where his family came from, and that is an experience a lot of Americans have. It's not gimmicky in the way, like, the Brady Bunch goes to Hawaii is. Like,
right,
this
right.
is a finding his roots type thing, not
Yeah.
a, "Let's just blow the show budget."
My wife's family has family in Italy, and what she and her mom did was they did the group tour that some tour company did, and then toward the end they just split off from the tour, and those folks went home, and they spent another 4 or 5 days
Cool.
just with the states. So she was immersed in all of that. So that part of the Romano vacation where they're staying with family is very much what my wife's experience was like, and not as crazy as that, but there's some wonderful video though. My mother-in-law gave
Mhm.
some gifts from upstate New York to these family members, and there's this place in upstate New York called the Herkimer Diamond Mine,
Mhm.
and it's actually pieces of quartz that are in this mine, and people can go in and mine for it, and then you buy it, and so she thought that would be an appropriate gift. And you hear these Italians who only speak Italian looking at the gifts, and my mother-in-law is trying to explain what it is, and she says, yeah, they're from the Herkimer Diamond Mine, and then you see this big smile on everyone's face.
Oh,
Diamonds.
no.
And then my mother-in-law realizes, no, 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 they're quartz. It's quartz. And they go, diamonds, diamonds. And it's just a very funny video. And I can imagine that kind of being shown in a Raymond episode where they're doing something.
Right. Oh,
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, the
yeah,
idea
that's
of real life and spinning it into a weekly narrative. I mean, it clearly was the success of that series.
yes.
I think we mentioned this on one of our earlier podcasts where I had heard Ray Romano on one of the commentary tracks in the video set make the comment that, while it said at the beginning of each episode it was based on the comedy of Ray,
Yes.
that really only lasted a few weeks, and then we were kind of off on our own. Because he said, I only had so much material, and once that was gone, we had to do our own thing, and so that's why the writers were so critical to how that show was done.
Right, and Phil also says, like, the early on, like, the Ray Barone character is half my life as well. And it seems like Phil and Ray have a great relationship, even though there was a somewhat rocky start because there is a person referred to as Iago in the book who tried to get between them and failed.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
I have my
yeah.
suspicions on who this person is. I don't want to slander them, so I'm not going to say who I think it is. But
I've passage. Yeah,
that's also a warning for anyone
well,
entering the industry to be aware that not everyone is on your side.
Yeah, that's true. And I'm sure there are a lot of untold stories throughout sitcom history of that personality type being, injected into a situation like that. And
Yes.
yeah, and you wonder as you go through that, and in Phil's case, how he, you know, it's his show, and from
Yeah.
Ray's perspective, well, it's his show, and it's like how do we kind of make it work so that we'll be here for 8 or 9 seasons, and they figured it out in a good
Right,
way.
and they got Aego out of the question very quickly. It also helped that all the other executives were just sort of like, yeah, we know what he's doing. Just ignore him.
Yeah, yeah. I think the networks were pretty smart in that whole the whole run of that series to kind of know when they needed to be involved, and know when to kind of stand back and let these folks be creative. That's why we have them here. And
Yes, and Leslie Moonves played a huge role in keeping Raymond on the air. And that is gone into in detail. Leslie Moonves is another person we don't really talk about anymore for similar reasons as Bill Cosby. Not nearly as bad, but also
sure.
accusations. But um, we also, for some reason, Phil was in this big meeting of CBS honchos, and Phil is a little bit responsible for CSI getting on the air somehow because
Oh
he was
yeah.
in the room and Moonves was sort of like, everyone is telling him, go with this show, go with this show. How did it test? It tested better than this other police procedural type show, but not that much better. And Phil's like, what are you doing? Just go with whichever one you like better. And then that chapter ends with, and that is how we got CSI. Just by being the little like nudge, like, hey, get off the fence, trust your instincts.
Yeah, yeah. um CSI New- Las Vegas. I don't know how they went all over. They had all kinds of versions of that show, and I wonder the same the same can be said about NCIS. I would imagine too.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go with our gut on this, and see. Um, it there's you touched on it just briefly, but we got to remind ourselves that Everybody Loves Raymond did not get great numbers in that first season, right?
No, and it didn't test well.
Where like a visionary like Les Moonves, okay, we're gonna stick behind this show.
Yes.
It's gonna make it, and you can. I remember watching the first season of Cheers, and you know
Hmm.
funny show, and yet you'd see the weekly numbers. And I'm like, I mean, it was
It
it
was
was
at the bottom at one point.
yeah, right, with the least watched show on at least a few weeks. Um, it was, but again, and then that takes us to the Grant Tinker era of NBC, and where okay, quality shows are going to find an audience eventually. We just gotta stick
Yeah.
with it. And I just, that's why I just recently read. I watched both of the new dramas on NBC that came at mid-season, Suits LA and the
Okay.
Gross Gardening Society or
The
whatever,
Grosse
and
Pointe Garden Society. Okay.
both were canceled. And I
Well, Suits
and
LA was
well,
going to be canceled. Everyone foresaw that.
I probably everyone except me, because I just
Oh,
enjoyed it. I never watched the original Suits, so I
yeah.
didn't have a comparison to like, oh, not as good as the other one or whatever. Um, but so yeah, I lament that. But then there was like some hope that Grosse Point would
Yeah, there was.
stock, but apparently it decided it just it 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 wouldn't be fair to try to build an audience with, on Peacock. And so, okay, but two quality shows, or maybe one, talking to you, because you weren't a big fan of Suits LA, but
I
um,
didn't watch any of Suits, to be honest. However, from reading the industry papers, it seems like NBC relied too much on the popularity of the original Suits because
mhm.
that's a huge hit on streaming. However, they neglected to figure out why that is such a huge hit on streaming. And the original was on cable and then they moved it to network, which always creates issues because now what content is okay? We now have to limit the language because even though this is for adults, cable you can pretty much say anything except like 4 words. On NBC, if it has 4 letters, you can't say it.
So
So
that
there's a
was,
bit
yeah.
of that too.
Okay, I didn't give any thought to that idea. Okay, yeah, going from a streaming platform to just a network. I mean, for me, I think it was something fresh in January. It's like, okay,
Yes.
the season wasn't a total waste. Here are a couple shows I can get, but I was the only one. My wife wouldn't go anywhere near either one. She, and
Yeah.
but I just enjoyed both of them, and then reading some of the responses and critics on Suits after it was canceled. Amazing how the critics really have their act together after something. They
Of
know exactly what
course.
after it is canceled. But that the whole idea that this they were going back to this one storyline about the main character's brother, and you kind of knew where they were going with it throughout, but it just seemed kind of awkward, or at least that's how these critics viewed it. I was lapping it all up and actually I was going to actually start watching Suits just to, that Suits LA, I'm enjoying. Why not go look at the
Yeah.
original? Makes me feel. That's why we need more Phil Rosenthal on television. We need to kind of see another project for him. But I do
Yeah.
take your about his age, his status now in the industry is maybe just this is the time we stand back and let the work speak for itself as it has for the last 20 plus years, and stand back and look at it with a lot of pride and a little magic captured in the bottle for a few years.
Right. He's at the point where Letterman and Conan are, where it's like, I did what I wanted to do, loved every moment of it, even the hard parts. And now I'm just doing what I want to do, and I'm lucky that people allow me to do it. We don't usually think of producers doing this, but he had the opportunity and he's been able to take advantage of it. He also had a deal in the book. It talks about he signed a deal with Disney and kept asking them to stay on Raymond. It got to the point where he's like, I'm done, just take the million back. I'm
Right.
staying. And then he was able to sign a deal with Paramount when CBS and Paramount combined again. And then I don't think he developed any other shows through it, at least none that he talked about. He talked more about his activities with the Clinton administration and writing comedy for Bill Clinton,
Right.
which like he wrote jokes for the president. It's not like he was making policy here.
Um, right. And we mentioned he produced the video, which might have been one of the first times that was done, where a
Yeah, it
little
was.
Letterman-esque kind of video piece runs during the correspondence dinner. And so
Yeah.
that was
You're breaking
a
up.
niche there that he can claim. Okay, hope I'm not kicking a wire, but perhaps I am. Am I okay now? Um,
Yeah.
so I think I think we i- again, you'd usually get these behind the scenes books, usually told from the perspective of the stars,
Mhm.
and they're fine. And I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I know this one I enjoyed, and the because it was from the perspective of the creative side of the whole effort,
Yes.
and again the mechanics of putting episodic television on a regular basis. And um, there was another um, the director of Cheers, some of the what's his name? The last name escapes me right.
Burrows.
Burroughs, yeah, yeah, Jim Burroughs. He did a book similar to that a few years ago,
Oh.
and he, yeah,
Okay, writing that down.
should I prepare for that podcast somewhere down the, but no, it
I
was
mean,
actually, yeah, it was very, it was good because he talked about Cheers, and of course that maybe that's why I mentioned that about Phil. Why didn't Phil go back to doing some other network sitcom programs? But he went in a different direction.
mhm.
That's fine. But Burroughs, he directed other series, and he had
Yes.
a great deal of impact. And he goes through practically every one, even the couple that didn't take off and all that. But
Yes.
that and I again, I'd have to kind of go back and review some passages of it. But he does get into you know what what a director can do with a script and bring out the best of the writing and the
Mhm.
acting. And just you kind of leave that feeling like it really does matter who the director is. If you've got someone like Burroughs who is available and able to do it and wants to do it, you could possibly have a big hit. And that's
Yes.
why I'm sure the networks at the time, and now it's been 20 plus years for Phil Rosenthal. It's like, okay, well, he's got his little thing going on now. He's probably not as in demand now as some of the more contemporary producers and directors who are out there doing stuff. Although I can't imagine Jim Burrows stepping away from a project if the situation was the way he
Right.
wanted it to be.
I mean, Norman Lear was working until the end.
Till the very end, right? Right. Remember the live broadcasts that were done a few years ago of they did a
Yes.
All in the Family and Good Times, and so yeah, and he was right there involved with it. So pretty phenomenal. We were really look at that kind of golden age with beginning kind of with Norman Lear and and this being so savvy with popular culture. Every age that's not now was the golden age of of
Yes.
television movie. If
Yes.
not now, at least the '80s were just amazing, or the '70s. You should have been around for the '70s, and it's funny. I attended a retirement party for a colleague a couple weeks ago, and the MC made reference and well she started here 32 years ago, and that summer the most popular song was I Will Always Love You. And then he paused and he says, can you just imagine her singing that song on her way to work every morning? And we had a big laugh because we can all imagine singing that song on the way
Yes.
that morning. So every age has a special meaning and place in all of our consciousness.
Yes. I think it's just how much of the good stuff we remember
That's right.
because, like you said, we can call the early years of television the golden age of television. And then there is a book on the 70s and 80s called the second golden age. And then David Bianculli, who I know, came out with a book. I was I had just graduated college, it's called the platinum age of television because, like what comes after gold.
Right. Right.
And it's like, okay, are all of these decades great, or are we just acknowledging that each one has great shows that rise to the top and then become part of the collective pop culture that you must know it in order to fit in? Like, if it's sort of granted, it's starting to change because of streaming, but but it's still like if you're like you've never seen I Love Lucy, like what is like wrong with you? Like that seems like such an essential part to understanding American culture.
It was, and to the I Love Lucy point, it just I think most of us who have seen I Love Lucy have seen the best of I Love Lucy. You've seen the
Yes.
vignettes where the loaf of bread expands out of the oven and our
Hmm.
Lucy on the grapes and all that. Very few people have seen the episodes beginning to end. They've seen those highlights and say, "Oh yeah, it was classic television," and it was no doubt classic television. And if every now and then I'll pick up a DVD at a used bookstore
Hmm.
that might be a compilation of hit shows of the
Yeah.
60s, and there's a few gems in there that we remember as, oh yeah, F Troop or whatever, but there was a lot of schlock that, and
Yes.
you just that's natural throughout television. You
Right.
have a how many shows actually make it to the end of and if success is defined by, let's say, a 5-year run,
Yeah.
um, there's a lot more that didn't make it that far, and then there are those that succeeded.
Right. Like with I Love Lucy. How many people remember the Lucy Desi Comedy Hour, which was basically an extension only in an hour form? Or All in the Family gets held up as one of the greatest shows of the 70s, but it was followed by Archie Bunker's Place, which removed the with yeah, removed Edith and brought in a child. But we don't
Right.
talk about that either, but that was just the continuation of it. And it wasn't a Cheers to Frasier situation. It was just like, okay, we lost an important character. We don't want to
Yeah.
cancel the show. On we go.
Sure. Sure. Um, was Alan Alda was asked about whether he could keep going with MASH for a couple more years. And of course, the series had already run like 3 or 4 times longer than the Korean War.
Right.
So, he said, no, this is it. He says, the last thing I want to do is uh, Hawkeye's place. And it was a slam on Carol O'Connor continuing All in the Family with Archie's
Yeah.
place. Point was that, like, hey, we you kind of know where the end is. Let's end it on as high a note as we possibly can.
And yet we still got Aftermash.
That's right. You got yes, one season.
And Walter.
Walter, I found that online one day. I didn't even realize that it had that there was a show about radar and
Yes.
short lived. I don't even remember it being on. Just I saw it on YouTube one day and watched a few minutes of it.
Yeah, MASH had quite a few spin-offs, and the only one that was successful is the one I'm blanking on right now. Um,
Yeah.
it's named after the character too, but
Okay.
what am I blanking on? Let me see.
I can't think of any other spin-offs from MASH, but
Yeah, MASH spin-offs. Let's see. Trapper John, MD.
yeah.
That was the one I couldn't think of.
Trapper John, yes, and Les Moonves had a small part actor in one of those episodes. Kind of interesting aside.
Did
And
not
I guess
know Les
decided
Moonves was in
to,
it.
the acting wasn't. Yeah, yeah. I don't know if I've seen that episode, but I read about that. That he had a small part. He was like a I don't know a patient that was being treated or something. And but yeah, what a series that had
Yeah.
a few years. So it must have been
I believe it was on for 5.
and of course, Purnell Roberts, who probably thought he would never work in a series again after he left Bonanza, and then finds himself, 7, 8 years later, doing Trapper John, and I guess whatever bothered him about working in the series, he must have lost that in time to milk that Trapper John for a few years or 5 years, as you said.
He didn't have to work with horses. Maybe that's the reason.
I know Michael Landon commented once they were showing stills of Bonanza on a talk show. I think it was the
Hmm.
Vin Scully show, which was a half hour on CBS that I personally liked, but it only lasted 13 weeks maybe. But Michael Landon was one of the guests, and they were showing stills from Bonanza and the early Bonanza, and there's Purnell Roberts, and he made some kind of snide comment about Purnell, and Vin Scully said, "Well, oh, gee, you didn't get along with him," and he
Hmm.
said something to the effect of, "Well, it wasn't that. It's just that here we were 6 months prior eating hot dogs, and suddenly we're on this number one TV show." And we've got the world at our hands, and all he could do is complain about everything. So he did not have a tremendous amount of respect for Purnell, given all the success that they had with
Right.
Banana, how ungrateful he seemed to be.
Okay.
Oh well.
Yeah. Is there
Well,
anything else you want to mention? I think we've covered the book pretty well. If you don't have a copy or haven't read it, check it out. It's by Phil Rosenthal. It's You're Lucky, You're Funny: How Life Becomes a Sitcom.
yes, I enjoyed it. Did not realize it was written in 2006, and it's amazing that we
Right.
both kind of covered it so long after it came out. But
Right. It
as you
came out right after Raymond went off the air.
And as you mentioned earlier, it is a perfect book for someone who is thinking about pursuing that side of the business. And it's I would recommend it as well. I was an
Mm.
adjunct professor at a small college in upstate New York for a number of years, and we it was a writing course, and one of the lectures was on television writing, and I had,
Okay.
other than my friend in LA who was in LA and couldn't be in upstate New York, I had to just kind of wing it based on some comments that he made. But I always left the students and acknowledging that we didn't have I didn't have that kind of background. So one of the things about sitcom writing is to look at it as a 3 act play, and the first
Yes.
act has already been written. So the establishment of the characters and all that's been taken care of. So you can start with Act Two, and that's your episode. And since you're holding up books, I'll hold up mine too.
There you
So
go.
doing well, Jack and Johnny,
Jack
and
and Johnny.
working on one for the holiday season that has some connection to It's a Wonderful Life, but when it's ready, it'll be ready in time for holiday gift giving.
Cool. And thank you again, Steve, for joining me. It's always a pleasure to have you on GFib. We'll find something else so that we can do this again.
I
And
hope so.
definitely. And until next time, I am Allison Lips. This has been Greetings from the Idiot Box. Remember, television is a medium, neither rare nor well done. Bye.